High stakes in New Hampshire tonight as Mitt Romney debates his Republican rivals for the first time in the 2012 campaign. While the economy will likely be the big issue, the candidates will also be quizzed on their policy prescriptions for Libya and Afghanistan. So joining us now, someone who's dealt with all of these issues, both as a presidential candidate and a military leader, retired general and former NATO Supreme Allied Commander, Wesley Clark. He joins me from Little Rock. General Clark, let me start with the debate part of this and just talk about what you remember going into your first debate, the things you were concerned about. And I'm just thinking maybe if you can help us what a Michelle Bachmann, who's doing her first debate, is dealing with, or Newt Gingrich, who got off to a rough start. He's going into what might be just going through their heads. You were a former candidate.
Well, there's really two things. First of all, you've got to be able to distill your message to quick sound bites. And the second thing is your advisors keep telling you, look for the knockout punch. And
right.
A lot of times there's no knockout punch. And if you want to say something substantive, like Mitt Romney probably does, you've got to get it into 2 or 3 sentences. I guess the third major thing is it doesn't matter what they ask, it's what you say. So you have to take a question and turn it to give you an opportunity to present your point of view.
You're killing me here, General Clark. What do you mean it doesn't matter what the question is? That's what, you know, that ties us folks in the media in knots, because we know this. We know that that's the advice many candidates give.
But you know, the hardest thing for me, Chuck, I was coming out of the military, is I would answer the question. And
well, that got you in trouble sometimes.
It took me several debates not to spend my time answering the question and then looking at the person who answers it. Did I answer it? Did I answer it? You look at the audience, and
right.
You're simply trying to get your message across to that audience. Now, if you can have an audience and rules where there's applause, of course, what you're looking for is that applause line.
Helps you out a little bit. All right, let me move to national security. Last week, and you probably followed this very closely, Secretary Gates, in sort of his farewell tour of the very blunt assessment of the future of NATO. As somebody who was in charge of NATO in the United States side as Supreme Allied Commander, what do you think of the Secretary's criticisms, this concern basically that the rest of the alliance isn't stepping up?
Well, I think that's valid criticism. It's not new, but he was able to give it in a very clear, forceful way as he's leaving office. I think it's important. Our European allies have to be reminded they need to do more. Their collective defense budgets for all the rest of NATO has gone down 15% since 9/11. Ours, of course, has more than doubled since 9/11. So they do need to do more. They've always needed to do more, and it's a long-standing debate in the alliance. But I think Secretary Gates' point is well made, and I hope our allies will listen.
You know, one of the things that strikes me as out of NATO's territory was when they actually got involved in Libya. And I say this because, you know, there was a time when if there was a conflict outside of essentially Europe and North America, it's called the North Atlantic Treaty Organization for a reason, that if it's outside those confines, NATO would be hesitant to get involved. But obviously with Afghanistan and now Libya, the future of NATO is more as in sort of world policing organization, I guess. But should it be NATO, or should there be other versions of NATO popping up?
Well, NATO's proved to work. And it made the decision in the early 1990s that it would do something to resolve the crisis in the Balkans. Ultimately, it did. We deployed peacekeeping forces.
But that was in Europe, so that made sense. That was about European security.
It was.
Yeah.
But it was out of the traditional NATO defensive area. And
right.
NATO wasn't attacked. So NATO made this important step of out of area. And then it was only a step further to go to Iraq, which they didn't do, and then to Afghanistan. And the United States brought NATO into Afghanistan really without a success plan. It was more like, hey, we'd like an exit strategy for the United States, so can we pass this off to NATO?
Right.
And it's turned out to be quite a challenge.
You know, over the weekend, Republican Senator Lindsey Graham was talking about Syria in terms of Libya, when he said when the decision was made to protect civilian lives in Libya and Benghazi, that was a good decision, and that we're almost at that point in Syria where the world needs to act. Are you in agreement with him on this?
Absolutely. We're probably beyond that point, but we have a problem. because when we acted in Libya, there was a lot of talk among some circles that Gaddafi was the low-hanging fruit. You know, he was going to fall anyway. Let's pluck that plum and pull it off the tree and take credit for it. And we got ourselves into Libya, and we're there now. I think the United States has maintained a suitably low-profile commitment, but NATO is fully committed. There are no excess non-American resources in NATO really to deploy into Syria, which is actually, if you look at it, it's much more important strategically in the world equation for war and peace than Libya is.
And as a humanitarian crisis, it could be growing and growing. Anyway, General Wesley Clark, I got to leave it there. Always enlightening to hear your views. Thanks very much.